Distinguished greetings to Dr. Jeffrey Brickle, teaching assistant Christopher Branos, and to my esteemed fellow classmates of New Testament Foundations, spring semester 2021. My name is Nathaniel Williams, and it is a distinct honor and privilege to present my first oral presentation as a student of Urshan Graduate School of Theology. My oral presentation will be upon the critical methodology of historical criticism. I will begin by defining the individual terms. Historical. Historical is defined as that concerned with or events of the past. Historical accounts based on or constituting factual material as distinct from legend or supposition. Criticism. The definition of criticism we are referring to in this presentation is that pertaining to evaluating data, observations, well-known facts, available research, as well as opinions to draw sound conclusions related to solving a problem or making coherent decisions and critical judgments. Historical criticism, also known as historical biblical criticism, historical critical method, or higher criticism, is a branch of criticism that delves into the origins of ancient text in order to understand what Dr. Jeffrey Brickle referred to as, quote, the history behind the text, unquote. Historical criticism gained prominence in Europe between the 14th and 17th centuries, the historic period known as the Renaissance. According to the Westminster Dictionary of Theological Terms, the Renaissance is a term which means, quote, to be born anew, a period in European history that marked a cultural transition from medieval to modern times. The rebirth of learning and other cultural elements set the stage for the Protestant Reformation, unquote. According to Stephen C. Barton, this Renaissance or revival brought, quote, a rediscovery of the Greek and Roman classics, an acceptance of the principle of the return to the sources in the original languages as an important principle of validity in interpretation, unquote. This major reverting to original languages for the benefit of interpretation, according to Barton, stemmed from two key areas. Firstly, quote, this lies behind the major developments in historical philology and textual criticism, represented by the Erasmus edition of the Greek New Testament. Secondly, it also lies behind the return to the Bible and the principle of sola scriptura, scripture alone, as the hermeneutical basis on which Luther and his fellow reformers challenged the teaching and practice of the Catholic Church and instituted far-reaching political, institutional, and doctrinal changes, unquote. Prior to the Renaissance, the Middle Ages had fostered tremendous impediments to the plain, concise interpretation of Scripture. Roy B. Zuck stated, quote, the Middle Ages was a vast desert so far as biblical interpretation is concerned. There was no fresh creative thinking about the Scriptures themselves. Church tradition was prominent, along with the allegorizing of Scripture, unquote. I believe there is church tradition, and then there is God-inspired church tradition, based on oral and written conveyance of the Scriptures. The Apostle Paul stated in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 15, KJV, quote, therefore, brethren, stand fast, and hold your traditions which ye have been taught, whether by word or our epistle, unquote. The Reformation revealed that Luther apparently was in pursuit of God-inspired church tradition based on oral and written conveyance of the Scriptures. Walter Sundberg stated, quote, while Luther may not practice historical criticism in the modern sense, he helps to prepare the ground for its appearance, unquote. Esteemed advocates of historical criticism were Desiderius Erasmus, 1466 to 1536 AD, and Benedict Spinoza, 1632 to 1677 AD. Sundberg stated, quote, Erasmus and Spinoza, unlike Luther, operate with what Peter Brook cause a sense of anachronism, which is crucial to the emergence of genuine historical sensibility. This is the understanding that the past is different from the present, that is subject to causes and beliefs that no longer hold. In order to know the past, one must go behind tradition, examining its text as source material. Unquote. Unfortunately, Erasmus and Spinoza's view of historical criticism evolved into a unified viewpoint, being that divine inspiration of scriptural interpretation and miracles had ceased, while humanism triumphed. Despite Erasmus and Spinoza's conclusions to the historical approach, Barton noted, quote, "Reading the New Testament today is necessarily, though by no means exclusively, historical task." Burton furthered, because the Bible is the book of the church, as such, it is read with the primary goal not of discovering historical data, but of the growth in the knowledge of the love of God, unquote. Not to diminish the value of historical criticism towards biblical texts, Barton concludes, quote, "Wise or apt readings of the New Testament and of the Bible as a whole must include the application of historical skills and sensitivity toward the past," unquote. The application of historical criticism is significant for the entire canon of Holy Scripture, seeing it is an ancient book. The portion of text I will be focusing on is the Gospel of Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 20. The historical cultural context was religiously Jewish, with a highly Greek cultural influence, dominated by a Roman political and military system. Pertaining to Matthew's authorship, N.T. Wright and Michael Bird stated, quote, "The early church ascribed the book to Matthew." Wright and Bird continued, "But the book itself is strictly anonymous. Nothing substantial in it identifies the author as Matthew the Galilean tax collector," unquote. The corpus of Matthew speaks volumes to the Jewish understanding of the Old Testament, and it is firmly believed by most scholars that the Jewish Christians were the primary targeted audience. David A. De Silva stated, quote, "Matthew appears to assume that Jewish Christians will be prominent among the Gospel's readership," unquote. An example of Matthew's strong Jewish emphasis is in chapters 2, verses 14 and 15, which states, quote, "When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son," unquote. The Hebrew people greatly understood the significance of the Exodus and what it meant to come up out of Egypt. This pericope here in chapter 2 opens speaking about the birth of Jesus Christ, the God-ordained King of the Jews. It closes with the death of Herod the Great, the human-appointed King of the Jews. Wright and Bird noted, quote, "The Roman Senate declared Herod King of the Jews and sent him back to Jerusalem to liberate it in 37 BC, unquote. The timeline of this narrative is approximately 2 years. Jesus had just been born between 7 and 5 BC, unbeknownst to the appointed King Herod. Herod's ascertaining knowledge of Jesus' birth was the direct result of wise men from a foreign country coming to inquire of Herod about an extraordinarily heavenly star which guided their journey into Herod's region. Craig Keener stated, quote, "Magi, not wise men, KJV, were pagan astrologers whose divine oratory skills were widely respected in the Greco-Roman world. Astrology had become popular through the science of the East." Keener furthered, "Astrologers have offered various proposals for the appearance of this star in the first decade BC. The ancients thought comets and falling stars predicted the fall of rulers." Keener concluded, "Many rulers feared astrological signs of their demise," unquote. The convicting truth of Jesus being born king, combined with a majestic celestial observation, was a perplexing conundrum for Herod. The Magi's search to find the newborn king of the Jews led Herod to seek counsel of the chief priests and scribes for confirmation from Old Testament texts of where Christ was to be born. These Jewish religious leaders not only shared texts giving the location, Bethlehem of Judea, directly in the region under Herod's authority, but also revealed the newborn king would be a governor that shall rule God's people, Israel. The historic Old Testament writings, along with the heavenly star, prove more emblematic against Herod's dynastic reign. Herod instructed the renowned astrologers that after visiting Jesus, to return and inform him of Jesus' exact location. Herod claimed his motivation was to come and worship the newborn king. But during this time, the Roman government did not operate democratically. Emperors had absolute power beginning with the reign of Augustus Caesar in 27 BC. Roman imperialism was autocratic from the top down. Herod had no intention of sharing rule with Jesus. Herod's aim was to destroy Jesus to retain his own power. This was proven after the Magi was warned of God in a dream not to return to Herod. Herod's demise therefore begins with information of a newborn king of the Jews introduced to him by traveling astrologers and confirmed by the Hebrew scriptures. Herod's fear was then conflated with anger against these very astrologers who did not return to Herod on their way home. Herod irrationally ordered all children 2 years and younger to be killed in Bethlehem and the surrounding close, including female children. Herod the Great died shortly at the close of this narrative. Wright and Bird stated, quote, Herod the Great, the most powerful Jewish monarch in the Roman period, ruled from 40 BC until his death in approximately 4 BC, unquote. In evaluating historical criticism applied to Matthew 2, 1 through 20, behind the text understanding of how Herod came into his position in direct contrast to both the divine and human conception of Jesus into his true kingship, reveals the pseudo-nature and vanity behind temporary earthly status. Behind the text research also revealed how astrology was instrumental and impactful even in the decision of monarchs, nobles, and the ruling class, illuminating some of the reasons behind Herod's actions and reactions. Herod's immediate acceptance of the Hebrew text, along with the astrological signs, speaks volumes to the syncretism strongly embraced in the Greco-Roman world. Key limitations to historical criticism within Matthew 2, 1 through 20 is the inability to provide data to God's spiritual operation, utilizing angels and dreams in the lives of the God-fearing parents of Jesus and the pagan astrologers for the purpose of performing his will. In my conclusion, firstly, faith in the divine author behind the text and behind all history can never be abandoned in the use of critical methodologies. In biblical research, God's divine providence must be at liberty to always operate beyond the human realm of what is possible into the God realm that for some researchers seems impossible. Secondly, to arrest original intended meaning from ancient texts demands a look behind the text. Historical criticism is therefore like a gate and a pathway that draws us into the realm behind the text to explore the original historical context. Historical criticism providing proper entry then enables us to employ other critical methods in conjunction with historical criticism depending upon the genre and types of texts being criticized. The goal is deeper understanding and meaning of what the divine author and human author originally intended.